It was supposed to be a quiet Saturday morning. My wife, Maria, was trimming the rose bushes. Our kids were chalking up the driveway with bright neon doodles. And I was sipping my coffee, trying to ignore the constant whir of lawnmowers echoing through Maple Ridge Estates. Our HOA prided itself on community harmony. But that harmony only seemed to exist in the glossy newsletters, not in reality. Then came the voice. "Excuse me." Karen's voice could slice through glass. She stormed across the street, wearing her usual floral robe and holding a clipboard, like it was a badge of authority. Her bleach blonde bob bounced with every furious step. "Do you people have any idea what you're doing to the grass?" she demanded, pointing toward the chalk drawings. "This is against HOA Regulation 14B. You're defacing common property." I blinked, staring at the patch of concrete clearly on our driveway. "Karen, this isn't common property. This is our house." "Not according to the community guidelines," she snapped. "Driveways must remain clear of any markings. It affects the neighborhood's aesthetic cohesion." Maria looked ready to laugh, but Karen wasn't joking. The more we explained that chalk washes off, the redder her face became. Eventually, she started yelling about setting bad examples and lowering property values. By the time she stormed off, our kids were on the verge of tears. I was furious but decided to let it go. You can't argue with someone who believes they're the HOA police incarnate. But an hour later, my phone buzzed. It was an email from the HOA board, specifically from Karen, who was also the neighborhood community wellness officer. According to her, our behavior was disrespectful and aggressive, and she would be seeking mediation. I couldn't believe it. The woman had yelled at my family, and now she was claiming we were the problem. I forwarded the email to the actual HOA president, Mark, assuming he'd set things straight. 2 hours later, there was a knock on our door. Mark stood there, hands awkwardly clasped. "Hey, Karen's pretty upset," he said. "She feels like things got emotional earlier. Maybe you could come by and just talk to her. Comfort her a bit." I stared at him, sure I'd misheard. "You want me to comfort the woman who screamed at my kids?" He nodded uneasily. "She's fragile right now. It'd really help the community if we could smooth this over peacefully." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a Karen problem, it was an HOA problem. I spent the next day replaying that absurd conversation with Mark. Comfort Karen, the woman who had called my children public nuisances. Still, curiosity got the better of me. If this was how our HOA handled conflicts, I needed to see just how far their delusion went. On Monday evening, I showed up at the community relations meeting in the clubhouse. Karen sat at the center of the long conference table, a box of tissues in front of her, as if she were the victim of a tragedy. Mark and 3 other board members sat beside her, nodding sympathetically. As soon as I entered, Karen sniffled dramatically. "Thank you for coming, Derek. I didn't expect you'd show up after what happened. I just wanted to restore peace." "Peace?" I asked. "You yelled at my kids for drawing with chalk." Karen gasped like I'd just cursed at her. "I was protecting community values. We have rules for a reason." Mark interjected, raising his palms. "Let's keep things calm, everyone. Derek, Karen's just asking for acknowledgement of how your response made her feel." I couldn't help but laugh. My response? She was the one screaming. We didn't even raise our voices. The room went silent. One board member scribbled notes while another cleared his throat awkwardly. Karen's actions may have been passionate, he said carefully, but as neighbors, we should support each other emotionally. So now I'm required to provide emotional support for being screamed at? I asked. Karen dabbed her eyes. A simple apology would help me move forward. That was it. I stood up. No. I'm not apologizing to someone who traumatized my kids. If this is how you run the HOA, maybe it's time for new leadership. Karen froze, mouth open. Mark shot me a warning look. Let's not escalate. But it was already too late. Karen leapt up, shouting, "This is harassment. You're intimidating me." The irony was almost too much. I walked out before the meeting devolved further, my pulse pounding. When I got home, Maria listened to the whole story and sighed. "You know she's not going to let this go, right?" I nodded grimly. "Yeah. But neither am I." The next morning, I found a violation notice taped to our mailbox, signed by none other than Karen herself. The charge? Failure to comply with HOA mediation expectations. She was officially declaring war. The notice was the first of many. Over the next week, Karen began a campaign of petty warfare. We got cited for leaving our trash bins out too long, for having a non-regulation shade of blue on our front door, and even for overly expressive seasonal decor. Maria wanted to ignore her. But I knew that silence only fed people like Karen. So I did my homework. I spent hours reading the HOA bylaws, line by line, regulation by regulation. What I found shocked me. Karen had been enforcing unapproved amendments that were never voted on. Half of her so-called rules weren't official at all. Armed with this knowledge, I drafted a formal complaint to the board, citing every infraction she had falsely imposed. I even attached photos and time-stamped videos. At the next HOA meeting, I came prepared. The room was tense. Karen sat stiffly at the head of the table, glaring daggers at me. Mark tried to keep things civil, but the energy was electric. "Before we begin," I said, placing a thick folder on the table, "I'd like to address a few rule violations by the board itself." Karen's smirk faltered. I opened the folder and began listing each item. Section 4. Article 2. Any proposed amendment must be approved by 2/3 majority vote. These chalk regulations. Not approved. Section 3. Clause 8. No individual member may issue citations without the board's review. Every one of these notices was unauthorized. Gasps rippled through the room. Karen's face turned crimson. "You can't talk to me like that. I'm part of the HOA executive team." "Exactly," I said. "And as part of that team, you should know how to follow your own rules." Mark shifted uncomfortably. "Karen, is this true?" She stammered, "Well, technically." "Technically?" I interrupted. "You've been bullying residents for months under fake regulations." By the end of the meeting, it was clear the tide had turned. The board voted to suspend Karen's authority pending review. She stormed out, muttering threats under her breath. That night, Maria hugged me. "You really did it." But my victory was short-lived. 2 days later, someone egged our house. The next morning, tire tracks ran across our lawn. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, I received another email from Karen's husband. He claimed I had created a hostile environment, and that they were filing a harassment complaint with the HOA's legal committee. I stared at the message, feeling a mix of disbelief and determination. If Karen thought intimidation would scare me off, she'd picked the wrong neighbor. The harassment complaint pushed things to the next level. HOA. Legal mediation was serious, it could lead to fines or even liens on our property. But I wasn't backing down. I gathered everything, the emails, the fake citations, even security footage of Karen dumping eggs in our yard under the cover of darkness. The day of the mediation felt like a courtroom drama. The board sat in a semicircle, Karen and her husband on one side, me on the other. A hired mediator presided in the middle, clipboard in hand. Karen started with her usual performance. Tears, trembling voice, dramatic sighs. I only ever wanted to protect our neighborhood's integrity. But Derek has created such hostility, I feel unsafe in my own home. Her husband nodded gravely. We've endured harassment and public embarrassment because of his vendetta. The mediator turned to me. Mr. Blake, your response. I played the footage on my laptop. The video clearly showed Karen sneaking across the street with a carton of eggs, tossing them at my window. The timestamp and date were unmistakable. Gasps erupted. Even Mark looked stunned. Karen's face drained of color. That's not me. She sputtered, though everyone could see it plainly was. I slid a printed copy of the HOA bylaws across the table. I've documented every instance of unauthorized citation, every abuse of authority, and every time she weaponized her position against residents. I'm not the problem here. The mediator scribbled notes, then looked up. Given this evidence, I recommend the immediate removal of Ms. Karen Hastings from all HOA positions. Karen shrieked, "You can't do this to me." But the board had already voted. Effective immediately. Karen was banned from issuing notices or attending board meetings for a year. When it was over, I walked out into the sunlight, feeling an exhaustion I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Maria was waiting outside. "So, it's over," I said. "Finally." She smiled, relief softening her face. "You sure she won't try anything else?" I chuckled. With how publicly that meeting went, I think even she's run out of allies. A few weeks later, the neighborhood felt lighter, less tense, more alive. The kids drew chalk rainbows again. Mark even stopped by to apologize personally, admitting that letting Karen run wild had been a huge mistake. Sometimes, standing your ground isn't just about principle, it's about setting boundaries that should have existed all along. And if anyone ever tries to tell me to comfort another Karen again, I'll just hand them a piece of chalk and point to my driveway.